We're going to skip the internal dialogue. I'm going to go straight into questions and ask Alex a follow-up question. We've seen some terrible pictures of students being locked up, badly treated by police for their protest against or their plan to march on Parliament. And those stories are again coming from the media. And so you have a comment on how that's been panned out through the media networks.
Yeah, thanks. The shooting of unarmed student demonstrators from the University of Papua New Guinea on the 8th of June was a very unfortunate incident. It was unwarranted, but basically the police decided to open fire outside the gates of the university when the students wanted to go to Parliament to give a petition to Parliament. And this was after close to 5 weeks of consistent protesting to force the Prime Minister to actually resign and step down from office. And it was the culmination actually, so consequently police opened fire. Close to 30 people were injured. There were 4 who were seriously injured, who were hospitalized. I think the Supreme Court's decision yesterday, basically it's a pressure valve, if you can see it that way. A lot of Papua New Guineans now will now see that, they will give a sigh of relief that the Supreme Court has actually ruled along those lines. Because ultimately, national parliament should make a decision when the country is in crisis.
Kalafi, last month there was a story that came out of Tonga about a young girl, a journalist, who asked the Prime Minister some very searching questions on education issues. And as a result of that, the Prime Minister tried to get her deregistered as a journalist. Can you explain what happened there and what transpired?
She's not a young girl, she's one of Tonga's most experienced journalists.
All right.
And she's been working in the government media. As you know, the biggest media in Tonga, with television,
yes,
radio, AM and FM, is the government. And she's been actually the editor of the news section of the government media.
Right.
But in interviews with the Prime Minister, she started probing quite deeply in some of those issues, and it offended the Prime Minister and offended his supporters. And so there were moves, immediately there were moves to get her to resign. They even instructed from the Prime Minister's office, the manager, to kick her out. And all kinds of pressures came upon her, and of course, quite a number of us as journalists stood with her and encouraged her. But that just shows you, this is coming from a government now, who for so many years was campaigning for media freedom, yes, and allowing criticism to be a normal thing in Tongan society. So that was a shock. Yes. And right now, she, of course, she refused to resign, and the government has kind of backed off because there were a lot of pressures from media from overseas on that. But there are quite a number of moves like this that happens with this government. I think if it was another government, it would have been different. But people are kind of shocked. They're asking, how would this government, a democratic government, a government who campaigned for reform, how could they do these things? And of course, it brings me back to some of the things that I said, yes, that good leadership, it's not so much the system. You can change a system, but you've got to change people. The leaders have got they're the ones that have to practice good governance. They're the ones that have to practice transparency and accountability. And if they're not, you can have a system, and you can have a constitution and everything, and it won't make a difference.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to open it to the floor now. Are there any questions? Penny?
Yes. Kalafi, I can tell you who is putting the babies in the baskets and sending them down the river. I've been to 5 international anti-corruption conferences, and I went to the Transparency International Conference in 2010. The figure that blew my mind was the global procurement market was seen as $14 trillion, of which $2.5 trillion was estimated to be lost in bribery and corruption. I had exactly the same question, simple peasant question, $2.5 billion, wouldn't that help to feed, clothe, water and shelter a few poor people? Then what hit me like a sledgehammer was Transparency International were not looking at the underpinning private procurement model. They were looking at the process, were contracts being done in a proper way, blah, blah. But nobody was actually asking, well, hang on a minute, we've had 30 years of this, public is bad, private is good. Where was that substantiated before it was forced upon the peoples of the world? Where has it been substantiated since? Then I realised that those fighting privatisation and those fighting corruption need to work more closely together, because in my view, I'm one of the very few people in the world saying this, the root cause of grand corruption is privatisation. And in order to help find out, to do the cost effectiveness, you need to know where exactly is the money going. And I'll make a stand on that one. But the Public Records Act in New Zealand is the piece of legislation which I believe would transform transparency in this country. Most people haven't even heard of it. But that's the thing. If you have full and accurate public records available for public scrutiny, you then can follow the dollar, which is the first step to helping to fight corruption, in my view. So I'm just wondering, does Tonga have a Public Records Act?
Well, as a journalist, one of the things I've always thought about and taught even our journalists in terms of investigation of corruption is you follow the money. You find out where the money is flowing and you follow that, and it usually ends up in the hands of someone who is not honest. And it has proven over the years, time and time again, that that's right.
Just as a follow-up question, is it true that the current, maybe the last 30 or 40 years of political power in Tonga are from, they've all come from 3 schools in Nuku'alofa. And these 3 schools, and no other schools have produced national leaders. And there's almost like I was going to say an old boys network, but there's some old girls there too. It's just an aside. I've heard that rumor several times from, and I wonder if there's some basis for it.
The first school in the Pacific Islands, Tubo College, just celebrated 150 years. It was the first school established in Tonga and in the Pacific Islands. And it was the only college for so many years. And so the late King Taufa'ahau Tubo went there, his brother was Prime Minister, went there. So majority of the leaders of Tonga in the 50s, 60s, 70s went to that college. The other one is the government college called Tonga College. And it was established about 1880. Tubo College was 1866. And they've had some leaders come out of that. So that's the second school. And the third one was actually founded much later in 1947, which is Tonga High School. And Tonga High School is a kind of an elite school where they have exams of all the primary schools, and they take the top people and put them into this Tonga High School. And right now in Tonga, most of the leaders that are emerging in Tonga come out of that school. So in a sense, that's true. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, back there.
Question for Kalafi. Regarding the journalist and her suspension from the FPC, given your involvement with and your knowledge of local politics, do you have any sympathy for Pakalisi Pahila's fairly obvious feelings that, in fact, she's part of an attempt by the old guard to constantly undermine him, particularly when you've got situations, as in the latest Casanok elections, where she's suddenly representing netball and siding with Lordsaveli in his fight against the Prime Minister to get rid of Lordsaveli over the Olympic Commission. I mean, would you have any sympathy for the Prime Minister's feelings on this one, and his feelings that perhaps she's abusing her position in the media to attack him?
That's a very, very good question, because when you look at politics in Tonga over the last 30 years, it's been politics, not so much of what you believe and what you advocate for, it's which side you are part of. And so even the pro-democracy movement became more of a side to belong to, and with Akilisi Pohiva being the leader, rather than what they really believed. And my involvement, I mean, I was in jail together with Akilisi Pohiva in 1966, but my recent involvement with them really brought it home to me that politics in Tonga have nothing to do with your doctrine, with your beliefs, it's which side you are part of. In other words, if you are critical of Akilisi Pohiva, you must be part of the other side. And if you're critical of the royal family or the nobility, you must be a part of the other side. And the reality in Tonga is that's not true. That is not true at all. I think what the Tongan population is really going for, they want something that is based on substance. And of course, it's proven out with this, this government. Despite the fact that Akilisi himself over the years have been having very good rhetoric on all of that anti-corruption. But the first thing he did when he got into office was appoint his son to be his personal assistant. The second thing he did was that he brought his son out of Fiji to be the chief advisor with his friend on education in Tonga, to reform education. So I can go all afternoon with a whole bunch of things that he did, which totally went against the very things that he has done. Sympathize with him, yes. As a critic, as an opposition leader, wonderful. But as a governor, terrible, terrible governor. And I told him when I first went in, I said, your problem is going to be this. You have an opposition mentality, but you need a shifted mentality to a governing mentality. And he hasn't done that. In fact, he's done it worse. He started investigating his own people and sniffing them out for corruption and everything. But that's the battle that this government is going through. And there's more corruption that has been uncovered during his time in the last just 2 years. He's hardly been there 2 years than in previous governments. So,
yes. Oh,
Give us some hope. Give us a good story. And I mean that sincerely, because what you're describing could also be a reflection of what's happening around the whole of the Pacific. So tell us, where do we go with this? And how are things going to change? I have to say some of the examples you've given, no different from here, this way.
Yeah, I've mentioned some of them. So, in fact, this leads into the same question I was going to ask Shailendra. You're teaching journalist students. What is the picture looking like there? You told me, was it last night, that there were 200 journalist students?
There's about 100 students.
Yeah, 100.
In a good year, we get about 100 new recruits.
Yes.
And it's a 3-year program and all that. And it's a bit tricky because the legislation in Fiji covers journalism students also.
Oh, really?
The students are not exempt. So you've got to be careful. You've got a student newspaper that would be scrutinized and judged equally with the mainstream press. So what we do is we can discuss things quite openly in panel discussions, class discussions and all that, and hope that nobody in class will go and talk outside the class. We can also set assignments and that sort of thing. And we also push the envelope as much as possible with the student publications. But there is a line we will not cross. So that's the situation. And that was not the situation prior to the 2006 school. However bad the situation was in Fiji prior to the 2006 school, we could speak freely without any kind of fear of being jailed or being fined in a big way or that sort of thing. So that's the big difference.
Yeah. Are you hopeful, Alex?
Well, the media in Papua New Guinea has played a very big role over the years, over the last 40 plus years, since Papua New Guinea became a sovereign nation. And there has been attempts to actually regulate the media before. And the last time it happened, there was a big public outcry, and Papua New Guineans actually took to the streets to hold demonstrations against the government attempts to censor or regulate. So there's a lot of, I think now with social media, Papua New Guineans are educating themselves and informing themselves on the benefits of joining the conversation, but also expressing themselves. And they now know that using the media, either be mainstream or social media, gives them that platform to enable that conversation to take place. So I have this feeling that there will be a lot of criticism. There will be a protest if the government decides to go down the path that Fiji has gone down.
Right. As an observer of Pacific-New Zealand relationships, there has been this belief that the young Pacific leaders come to universities in New Zealand or Australia to get their academic training and some work skills, so they can take these back to the countries to improve the development, business, commerce, academics, and even the media outlets. But has that happened? Because what you're describing is almost like they're going into a sealed chamber where they can do all their business, but in terms of expressing their own personal views or public views about matters that are happening in their country, which they are very well versed to comment on, they risk suffering sanctions of one sort or another.
I want to respond to the hope cry, which is very, very important. Just because we are going through struggles now with our democracy doesn't mean that democracy is not a good system that we need to follow. That there are principles in there, all the leadership that needs to be there. We're like a boat that have hit a storm, a hurricane. And we just need to manage and adapt and adjust to that. If you think that this storm that we're experiencing will have us go back to the thing of the past, that we are now going to go back to a kind of like the rulership that we've had, no, that's not going to happen. We've already left the dock. We're already on our way into the future. We've just got to know how to manage this storm that we're in. But I think some of the messages that are coming through is that we need to make adaptation in the lives of leaders. It's a character issue with a lot of things that we deal with. It was not until I got in to be operating within the Prime Minister's office that I see that a lot of it is a character issues. That some of the rhetoric, some of those guys don't really care about what the people think. They don't really follow democratic principles like we know them. So I think the issue that we are going through in Tonga, it's a matter of calm down. Let's just go through. There is a vote of no confidence that's coming up in our parliament against this government. This government, it's just 2 years. The Prime Minister will not run again. So we've just got, I guess, to be patient, manage things, and hope that things will be the future. Maybe another good suggestion is to exchange Prime Ministers. Yeah.
So it's like
We'd like some of the other prime ministers of the islands to come to ours, you know.
So you can take it back to Parliament.
I think that's important because, as you'll know, there's a growing Pacific population, young people growing up in New Zealand, who are also on a journey about finding their identity. And part of that was encouraging them to come back, encouraging them to be interested in what's happening. And unless that message of hope is provided for them, many of these will wash their hands and say, that's not my country.
Yes.
I don't have anything to do with it,
Yes.
if that's the case.
And that's why I mentioned before, it's this whole thing of who do you belong to. There's so many great Tongan people overseas, very qualified, that are willing to come back to Tonga to serve the country. But the question usually asked of them, which side are you on?
Yeah.
And we're wanting to move the country to a place where it doesn't really matter which side, whether you're Republican or Democrat or whether you're Labour or National. We need good people with good governance who are able to come in and be leadership. And I think that's the process, the period that we're going through, and we're just hoping it's going to be over soon.
Any?
Thank you, Kalafi. Kalafi, Shailendra has, I think he's from Samoa anyway. Shailendra has called for the notion of this a need for more investigative journalism. And that comes out of every institution that's in this room and in this conference this week. My question to you, Kalafi, as a veteran in the region, and would you position yourselves, like we have young graduates coming out of institutions, would you position yourself to take the lead, for example, and in the likes of Xavier as well, and every other veteran in the industry, to take the lead in ensuring that young graduates are as well, seeing you and, take that leadership in asking the hard questions to the leaders? Because at the end of the day, it's about our role as media practitioners to bring those stories out.
Mm. Yes, very, very much. Of course, I personally believe that every journalism is all investigative. You've got to investigate. That investigative journalism is not just another section that when you feel like it, you get into. Every story must be investigated. And so I really believe in that. I think there are other factors that we deal with today in the emerging journalism, and one of the gentlemen here referred to it. I mean, there's no problem in discipling so-called and letting them follow through. But the very important factor of the day is that they've got to be paid. And the wage of today and the needs of today is so very different from when we were starting out as pioneers. We could go in there, write stories, and because we were, it's our own organization, if there's not enough money on that week, you don't get paid, but you keep going. Today we have a much more educated young journalists that are emerging. I must say though, they are less passionate about the issues than when we were growing up, and they are demanding high wages, and probably they deserve that. But the island organizations in our region, especially in Tonga, we don't have that. We have so many good Tongan journalists who are trained, but they are working for the Australian High Commissioner, for the Chinese High Commissioner, the Japanese, right, so because they pay them well, and we can't pay them.
No. Can I ask you a more regional question? What is it sort of follows up with Sua's question about hope. What is the status of the regional media bodies that they gather and support each other and tell each other stories which the writer can't tell in their own countries? What's the state of the regional? I'm familiar with PINA,
yeah,
etc.
Yeah, well, I've been in conversations and interaction with PINA, Pacific Islands News Association. Yes. There is a lot happening behind the scenes. PINA did have a regional summit for all media islands media organizations. I think 2 months ago. Right. So that's happening. There was training that they also get to roll out. There is training that they get to roll out at their summits that they hold for media organizations. I think the key is being a member of PINA in order to benefit from the training that they provide.
Right. Okay. So there is some regional. So you sort of had a long view of these regional bodies. Kalafi, what do you think?
I think there's been a decline.
Yes.
A very significant decline in the role and that is played by the regional bodies.
Yes.
We've got PINA, and it's not like as it was in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It's we've got a new organization that I helped founded called PASIMA.
Yep.
Well, it was great. We had a documentation what we're going to do. We haven't met for 3 years. So,
Yeah.
but and of course you've got your own PIMA organization here in
Yes.
New Zealand,
Yeah.
the Pacific Island Media Association, which I was the founding chairman for
Yes.
for some time. So when you look at the region, at the organizations, media organizations, there's been a huge decline,
Yes.
and you start asking what the role is. Whether
Right,
this
okay,
means
okay.
there need to be new organizations, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think this is where the role where the journalism schools will play a major part. The journalism schools become the forum by which a lot of training, not only training, but where you congregate,
Yes.
like David has done here with the
Yeah,
Pacific
yeah,
Media
yeah.
Center.
Yes.
They do a lot of things that media associations should have been doing,
Yes.
but are not doing.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a shift here in emphasis in creating new forums for the media schools, like with Vicky in Samoa,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
Centra in USP, and then UPNG, and then here
Yeah.
in Auckland with what's
Right,
happening here.
right.
Yeah.
Shailendra, I'll leave the last word for you, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, just very quickly about regional media organizations. In the Pacific region, they are quite rudimentary outfits. I think in recent times, the funding has dried up even more. And then if you look at PINA, for example, it's run by only 2 people. And they're already overloaded with quite a bit of work. And I think what Kalafi said about tertiary organizations and also media educators playing an important role. Yes, we can step in and hold media summits, conferences, and also research.
Right.
So that's a possibility of providing
Right.
training and material.
Great, great.
One last thing I'm going to say about Fiji. It's not that in Fiji you cannot criticize the government. The government is becoming more tolerant of criticism as time passes. Fiji's case is very complex. It's not like New Zealand, Australia. And I think some of the population is recognizing that democracy in Fiji is not an event but a long process and a painful one. So some people are a bit more patient than others, right? And we don't forget that this government was voted in by a 60% margin. So some people, it would seem, given Fiji's past history of instability, corruption, and all those sorts of things, they possibly prefer a strong center or maybe a benevolent dictatorship. So that's the observation.
Right, great, thank you. Now, I'm going to call on Camille to report back to us on some of the themes that she's come across. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll just try to put it all together. We heard 3 brilliant speakers supported there by Fuimaono. And Kalafi spoke about reform, and in spite of the reforms that took place and the fact that democracy was there, corruption still continued. So it's not about governance, but it's the people that are there and the good leadership that is required. And you mentioned that by stopping corruption, we can stop many of the world's developmental problems that we have. So we need to address the source of the corruption. Shailendra, you looked at the fact that the corruption is a serious problem and it hampers the opportunities to escape poverty, in line with what Kalafi said, and is responsible for the past 4 coups that took place in the last 25 years. Because the coups were operated, as you pointed out, by a corrupt business cabal, and politicians, you've said, are not taking corruption seriously. So the staff turnover is high. Some of the problems that we have in Fiji and the newsroom capacity, there are problems to do investigative journalism. You've highlighted that we need experienced investigative journalists to actually highlight the issues of corruption. Because apparently the corrupt politicians keep turning up. Alexander, you've looked at mainstream media in Papua New Guinea, and the challenges there are well known in Papua New Guinea: poverty, HIV, tuberculosis. You've argued that journalists need to start asking the hard questions. And it is a hard task for journalists to hold government accountable. Social media, you pointed out, is a blessing because it gives you that freedom of expression, but probably not if they are going to be taking in and arresting young people being on social media, and you've cautioned that governments may attempt to regulate media industry. So looking at all that you've said and listening to the questions that have come from the audience, in terms of corruption and in terms of the media role and the fact that corruption doesn't seem to be stemming in any way, and in fact it's growing. The question I asked, listening to all of you, is not what next, but actually the foreboding and worrying question is, who is next? Which Pacific Island is next that we now hear about the banning of the media and trying to control, and that is a concern here for not just the media educators, but to a citizenry in the countries. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you very much, everyone. Can I ask everyone to give the presenters a big